Poison's Something to Believe In, one of the best power ballads from the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in that range. I was in like 6th, 7th, 8th grade at the time. Huge Poison fan, loved hard rock, loved hair metal, all great stuff. Arena rock was fun. It was awesome to listen to, and it was uplifting. We're going to talk a little bit about that song today in this episode, but we're also going to be meeting up with author Christopher Long today, who wrote Superstar and also wrote A Shot of Poison. Chris, in many ways, was a band member. He was the personal assistant to Mr. Bobby Dahl, and he had a lot to talk about in this episode. This one is a lot of fun, folks. It's the end of the year. Buckle up, stay tuned. We're ready to rock.
Welcome to the Song and Verse Podcast, a discovery of God's Word, one song and a few verses at a time. Here's your host, Rockin' Odd Todd.
Hello, Merry Christmas, and welcome to the Song and Verse Podcast, a discovery of God's Word through song and verse. I am your host, Rockin' Odd Todd, and we're so happy you've decided to join us today. There are so many bands in the 80s and 90s that really kind of defined what hard rock was and what it would really kind of evolve into in some ways. And Poison was one of those bands that really kind of set the stage. And throughout time, they've really kind of made a name for themselves. They have not gone away. Bret Michaels and CeCe DeVille, Ricky Rocket and Bobby Dahl all are still major components in the world of music. And it's pretty phenomenal to watch how that career has transpired, because in the very beginning, the music was awesome, but they had this glam appeal. And in many ways, they looked like a bunch of girls. And so they really got ridiculed for that. There was a number of bands doing that at the time, but for some reason, Poison took way more heat than the rest of them did for that whole image and the way they looked. But as their career went on and as their music evolved, it became less about the image and more about the music. And what's been so cool is to watch that evolve and watch that take place. And in this episode, we'll be talking to Mr. Christopher Long, author of the book Superstar and A Shot of Poison. And in this particular episode, we'll be talking about A Shot of Poison, the 10th anniversary. Now, A Shot of Poison is his detailed story of life on the road with Poison. And, you know, it took, I believe Chris said, over 7 years to compile all of the stories as part of this book and part of this narrative. And I'm going to let Chris do a lot of the talking in this narrative. And you'll also notice that we talk a little bit about some of the band members and CeCe DeVille and how incredibly talented he was on guitar. And we'll talk a little bit about CeCe and his faith too, and how he's kind of figured out that life's a little bit more than just sex, drugs, and rock and roll as well. But you'll also notice we'll talk a little bit about Bret Michaels being the front man, Ricky Rocket being the peacemaker and just an awesome drummer, and Bobby Dahl is no holds barred, man. This guy's the business element to Poison. Without Bobby Dahl, there is no Poison. And so we talked a little bit about that as well. And in this episode, we got to go to Mutzler Creative Media into their studio and really get to spend some time there. Shout out to them. And Chris is one of those guys that I get to sit down personally and talk to and not have to do any of this Zoom nonsense. So it was really awesome to meet up with him. And if you've been keeping up with the site, we've been putting out little snippets of this interview in the process. And there were 2 books being given away in a drawing for anyone that signed up on our mailing list. And we were giving away Superstar and a signed copy of Shot of Poison 10th Anniversary Edition. And we're going to go ahead and announce that winner right now in this episode. Miss Darlene Branch, congratulations. And thank you to everybody that signed up and applied. We are going to have a lot of updates coming out from Song and Verse in the coming months. January is a relaunch of everything in many ways. And we're going to be looking at going across multiple platforms, not just YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, but many other alternatives to get the word out and really start having a serious conversation about music and faith. So without further ado, this was a great episode. Really enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy it too. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Song and Verse Podcast. We've got author Chris Long with us again today. We've talked to Chris in the past. We are on location here at Muchler Creative Media in their studio. They've been gracious to let us use that. And we've got a lot to talk about, a little bit of a continuation from the last time we had Chris on, which is a magnificent episode. If you haven't checked that one out, look up Cinderella's Somebody Save Me, which was a great, great episode. But today we have Mr. Chris Long again with us today. How's it going, bud?
Do you shake hands?
I do shake hands.
Right.
We can do that.
God bless you.
You too, bud. So how's it going?
I don't live in fear.
I hear you, man. How you?
Great, but just powering through a difficult year, but
Tell me about it.
powering through faithfully.
So how has that affected you, Chris, the whole COVID thing?
It's been the best of times. It's been the worst of times.
Yeah.
I have had a successful business for years in the nightclub industry, and here in Florida, that business has been exterminated.
Yeah.
Even with the state guidelines being relaxed and those restaurants and bars opening up, it has still had a major impact on my business, all but exterminating it.
Is that coming back around a little bit at all, or not so much?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit, not a lot. But on the upside of that, with the shelter-in-place scenario we found ourselves in this year, it has allowed me an opportunity to focus more on writing. Mm-hmm. In that time, I finished a new book that we'll be talking about here shortly. Yeah. It allowed me the opportunity to develop my other business with writing. I do reviews and feature stories for various different entertainment news outlets. So while one door seemed to be sort of closed this year due to COVID, another door, and I'd already been at the door, but the opportunity opened wider for me. Sure. So I'm just looking at the glass as half full, and I'm just grateful for the opportunities that God has presented to me this year.
Definitely, and I think that's interesting because there's always that glimmer of hope and that light that's shining through, even when it seems like it's dark. And if we gravitate to that and hold to the promises that are in here, we'll get through it.
I wear glasses, so my eyesight is not always so good. So I have to have faith in Amen. God's vision and His long game. Eyes
on Christ,
exactly.
Definitely.
So I'm not worrying about anything.
Definitely. So Superstar we talked about last time. Great book. Check it out.
That's my fiction debut, Superstar, that came out in 2019. And continues to do well, and I even spent some time this year, 2020, in the COVID world, traveling a little bit.
You did. You went back home to Missouri even, didn't you?
I went back to my hometown of Springfield, Missouri, and did some radio interviews and TV press ops and so on. So I had to power through cautiously, but the virus didn't keep me completely inert. We just moved forward. And so Superstars continue to do well. Awesome.
And today we are actually looking at a book that we talked a little bit about in the last episode, Shot of Poison. Now, you had stated that when you got this, when it came in and you had seen the book, you thumbed through it and you had kind of gone through your own spiritual awakening and were just like, ugh, what did I do? What have I done? What did I do? Why do I feel this way about that type thing? So tell me, why after 10 years do you go ahead and revisit it? What's the story?
Well, it's an interesting story because it's the 10th anniversary edition of A Shot of Poison. So it's my new old book. It was my first book, the original edition.
So this was the very first book?
The very first book that I ever did. And I was just getting my foot in the door in terms of writing, and certainly in terms of the publishing world. And I got offered a very big opportunity very fast, and I learned a lot. And 10 years later, I'm a different guy than who I was when I wrote the original version of the book.
And how
in
long did the original
2010.
book take to write?
The first edition of A Shot of Poison that came out in 2010, that book was in development for about 7 years.
Okay.
And I had actually had extensive personal conversations with all the members of the band and members of their management team for years that I had planned on pursuing a book project based on my experiences with poison.
So when you say you were a different person, by the time the book released, that's 7 years worth of stories leading up to who you would be ultimately becoming.
Well, during that time, up until I had what I called my faith transformation in 2010, shortly after the original version of A Shot of Poison was released. And although I was raised in church as a kid, as I became a teen, I was sort of pushed away by religion.
Sure.
And as I've said before, there's a difference between relationship and religion. Religion is that man-made punch in the face, and relationship is that beautiful embrace from God. So as I was pushed away from church as a kid, I was getting turned on to chicks and smoking dope and rock and roll and all that fun stuff that most of us go through as a teen. And as I was more and more distanced from church, because I was saved when I was a little kid, but I didn't really have a grasp on that. I thought being saved was just fire insurance. It's a sort of the thing we learned in vacation Bible school. You don't want to die and go to hell. Well, I don't want to die and go to hell. So I understood Jesus and Jesus being the Son of God and accepting Jesus and eternal life. I understood those bullet points, but I became saved at, 7 or 8, really as fire insurance. So as I became older and felt more and more pushed away from church, that distance between me and God grew.
Sure.
I was pursuing sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. I was going to be a rock star, and I was just all about consuming and craving that rock and roll lifestyle.
Well, and a question for you about all that. Do you feel like in that industry, there's a certain narrative or certain sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they all go together, and if you're not doing them all three together, then you're doing it the wrong way? Does that make sense a little bit?
Based on my experiences, I think that's absolutely the case.
I mean, let's put it this way. The straight-laced dude that's got a family that comes in, plays, and goes home, that's kind of the oddball in the industry.
That's the oddball, and based on my experiences, the path that I walked.
And the hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right.
But you get into that world, and the reality is, it's a buffet, man. All that stuff that we read about in rock magazines and we imagined watching MTV, it's a reality.
Sure.
And very late in life, at a time when most people my age had given up on their dreams, had become parents, and in some cases, grandparents.
Sure.
At that time, when clearly I wasn't going to become a rock star. So all of those plans that I had made, because I'm so smart, clearly weren't going to happen.
Right.
But the bass player for Poison, Bobby Dahl, coincidentally lived in my hometown here in the Melbourne, Florida area. And we both grew up in this area. We did not know each other as kids, but we had a lot of the same friends growing up. So years later, he moves to Pennsylvania, then he's out to LA, the band blows up. He comes back to Melbourne. At that time, through our mutual friends, Bobby and I developed a friendship, developed a relationship.
And so this is after the heyday of Poison.
No,
really.
we were hanging out. I mean, I was with Bob at the house, and
so in the album, in the discography range, where would that have been? Like what's the time frame?
Flesh and Blood.
Okay.
I remember being with Bobby at his house the afternoon before he left for the Flesh and Blood tour.
Wow, pretty much.
So that goes back, late 80s,
Yeah,
1990, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was a slow burn, our friendship. It just developed for a number of years. And he had gotten to a place of sobriety, as had I. And it was really important as Poison launched into their second chapter of success in the 2000s, and they were back doing arenas and amphitheaters and so on, and they became a major touring act again. It became important to Bobby for him to have a personal assistant with him who was at least competent enough to carry his luggage, at least competent enough to get coffee, but particularly he needed a guy who he knew and who was sober. Based on his sobriety at that time, it was very important to him. So being in that world, your personal assistant is your right-hand man. So to have a guy touring with him at that time, that person
Well, it sounds like you
needed to
guys
be
had
sober.
you had this parallel relationship too, in some ways, where you've been through some of the same things and could share a little bit.
Absolutely,
on that
that's
level,
what
too.
was so beautiful about our friendship prior to me being hired to work for the band, and that was we are the same age, we grew up in the same area, grew up with the same friends, we went to the same concerts, we probably bought dope from the same guy, we did all that same stuff. And then as adults, we were both married around the same time, we both had kids the same time, raising our kids at the same time, Bobby and I taking our sons out bowling, or to play miniature golf, just doing dad stuff together. And we went through our divorces at the same time. So, it was just a really honest, valued friendship, and in which one of the guys just happened to be one of the biggest rock stars in the world.
Sure.
The way any natural relationship is with your best buddy.
Sure.
That's the way it was. So based on that relationship, come 2006, I'm 43 years old in 2006. Everybody had given up on their dreams.
Sure.
I had begun writing for a couple of local print magazines back when they used to have print publications, and before the internet exploded. So I was just starting to develop my writing audience, and it was their 20th anniversary tour with Cinderella, and Bobby calls me up and says, "Hey, I want you to come out on tour with me as my assistant." So here I am at 43. When I was young, I thought all my dreams were going to come true. They didn't. Then as a much older adult, in my 40s, those dreams did come true.
Right.
And here I am at that age, and I'm on the bus with one of the greatest rock stars ever, Bobby Dahl, and I'll defend that statement. Talk about mystique and charisma. Bobby Dahl is Poison, in my mind. So they travel on individual buses. Each band member has their own bus, and then there's a crew bus. As a personal assistant, I was not considered crew, I was considered band. So I was actually traveling with Bobby on his bus.
Each guy had their own.
And each band member had their own personal assistant. Usually each bus was comprised of the bus driver, the band member's assistant, and typically the band member's stage tech. Gotcha. So you've got this huge luxury tour bus with only maybe 3 or 4 people on it. So that was really cool. And so here I am, living it, man, on the road, on the tour bus, traveling with the rock stars, working for the rock star. I'm backstage, on stage, 5-star hotels, the best food, the most beautiful girls, all of those sorts of perks that band members enjoyed. As an assistant, I enjoyed many of those same perks. Sure. So it was really an amazing experience, although it wasn't my band that got signed. It wasn't my band on stage. I was still
and it was
living
your
it.
And it was your best friend.
At that time, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, you go to a concert and the house lights cut to black, and then you hear that intro tape, do 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 do, and the crowd's going crazy. Well, that was me on tour with Poison. Those house lights cut to black, and there I am with Bobby, and we come out of the dressing room, and I'm leading him by the arm. I got the towel, I got the flashlight, I've got a bag of his accessories that he would need on stage that night, and here I am leading him to the stage, and you hear the roar of the crowd and the intro tape, and I'm walking him up the ramp onto the stage. It was really cool, really exciting to actually live that. You know, I don't, for as much of a roller coaster as those experiences were, and for as often volatile and unpleasant as some of those realities could be, I was so grateful to have had those experiences. I don't have to imagine what that world is like. When I'm writing books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, I don't have to sit and try to imagine what that world is like. I was there. I saw it. I know exactly how it is. And I'm just really, really grateful for that. Now, my motive in writing that book from the very beginning was not to come from a pro or con perspective. I just saw myself as a reporter, like maybe in the 60s being sent to the trenches of Vietnam, right, and just coming back to report on the war, or to be sent out by a local news crew to the county fair or whatever that is. I just saw myself as the reporter being sent out to bring a story back to my readers. And if it was nothing but a good time rock and roll party, fantastic. If it was a less than positive experience, is irrelevant. It wasn't whether it was a great time or a drag. It was just about going out and having that authentic experience and sharing that, because I don't think a lot of people, particularly music fans, rock and roll fans, there is that perception that we have, sort of almost we even have a TV show, American Idol, right, and we sort of worship our rock stars. And it could be a country guy, it could be a hip hop, the genre doesn't matter, they're all rock stars. And we have this perception of them just being so praiseworthy. And we have such a perception of how that world must be so great. And we just crave that. That was me. I was that guy worshiping the rock stars and craving that lifestyle. And in a lot of books, that perception is perpetuated. Mm-hmm. So I was the guy coming out of left field with the book going, hey, not for nothing, but I was there. And this really is how that world works, you know. Somebody said to me when the original version of A Shot of Poison came out, she said, well, why are you wanting to bash Poison? And I had to think about it. At that time, it had never dawned on me that I was bashing anybody. Most of those stories are hilarious.
Well, the other interesting thing is VH1 Behind the Music had total a certain amount of stories as well.
Absolutely. It was not, not telling anything that anybody shouldn't already know.
Right.
And,
or at least assume maybe in some
yeah,
ways.
Yeah. So just verifying the reality of that world. And I found it really odd that this particular gal, her perception was that I was going to bash the band. I love that band. You kidding me? In my world, Poison is an American rock and roll treasure.
Yeah.
In my world, and I've been around, it's not like I'm some dumb kid. In my world, my experienced view, Poison is one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. Totally in there with the Van Halens and the Aerosmiths and so on. And just based on the quality of their songs alone, it's an incredible band. So that certainly was not my intention to bash anybody. And then stories that were meant to be fun. I mean, you look, especially the original version, you look through some of that, it's like, come on. If you can't see the humor in these stories, you've really got a stick shoved somewhere, or you really have some serious blinders going on. But sure enough, like my friend who thought I was going to be bashing Poison, a lot of readers the first time around, for whatever reason, missed the humor factor and took it as, a bashing and me being a jaded former employee trying to cash in on these rock gods, which certainly was not the case at all. As a matter of fact, I shared before the book even came out. And like I said, I discussed this at length with all the members of the band for years.
Yeah, which is documented throughout here. They knew that you were documenting a good portion of the...
As a writer, before I started working for the band, I did several what we call phoners, telephone interviews with various band members. And I did several with Brett. And I've got the old cassettes where we're talking at length about this book project that I wanted to pursue. So it was certainly no surprise. And just before the book came out, I was having a conversation about it with Bobby. And he said, I will censor the conversation. This is a faith show, and I'm very respectful to the audience. So let's just say that he had doubts. He had no concerns about anything that I was going to write because he had specific doubts. In fact, he was quite convinced that I would never get a book deal and that it wouldn't be relevant. So, that's where I was coming from, was as a reporter, just bringing an accurate story. Because I was reading books at that time by other writers, and it was just such sanctimonious drivel. It was like, come on, can't anybody write, good or bad, I just want to read something real. Right. So that's what was driving. Oh, and I know what I was telling you. Not only had I had the conversation with the band members, but I had sent complete advanced PDF manuscripts to various people in the Poison organization. What do you think about this? And to the man, everybody responded, it's so accurate, it's so funny, it's so...
And so were these people that were upset after the fact too, these same type people that saw the manuscript?
Well, let's say they, in a lot of cases, they pled ignorance.
Gotcha.
You know, when it became known that the band was probably less than enthusiastic about it. A lot of the people who thought it was so great 6 months earlier were sort of taking the fifth on that.
Right.
But what I was really found particularly interesting was that on the front end, people in that world got the humor. That was the one thing. Accurate, and it's hilarious. Perfect. But then once it started getting out to readers, and it has just, the original version received some amazing, lovely reviews from people who totally got it and enjoyed it. But at the same time, it had been grilled unmercifully by others who I think just missed the humor factor. And that's one of the things that I noticed. If you were in the industry, you probably got it. But on the outside, just worshiping at the altar of the rock gods,
Sure.
you might have missed it.
So at some point, I want us to transition into the music element of it all. But I guess my question, so when you got the first version of it and set it down and did the book tour and you're going through the obligations of it all, in your mind, what's the biggest difference between that one and this one?
Well, it was really interesting because, like I said, I'd been saved since I was a kid, but there was no relationship there. And, they say God works in mysterious ways.
Oh,
so
definitely, trust me.
At the time when the original version of that book came out, I was a wreck. I had been sober for years, but there was a lot of drugs in my world.
Well, and you had been through some pretty rough moments on the tour as well.
Sure.
Yeah,
But there was
health-wise
just
and everything else.
a lot of darkness.
Sure.
With drug addiction, people in the program will often refer to hitting rock bottom. So about the time the original version of A Shot of Poison hit, about the time it was released, I was hitting my personal, spiritual sort of rock bottom. Mm-hmm. I had been pursuing just a lot of garbage for years. That's what I was after, and garbage in, garbage out. Definitely. So that was my world, was just, just pursuing that sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. And then the distance between me and God, that lack of relationship. And then you mix in some of the pills that were going on at that time. So I was a wreck. And when I wrote the original version, it's like I had one set of goggles on, and I'm looking at it going, this is hilarious. This is cutting edge. This is so cool. And then the day came, and the UPS guy knocked on my door with a box of promotional copies of the finished book. It was like release day. It was, in the music business, they'll say it was the street date, that the book was released worldwide. And so I got this book of, a dozen or so advanced promo copies from my publisher. And I pulled it out. And at the time that I should have felt really proud, really proud of myself for this. Look at me. Here's my international book, and look what I did. But what actually happened was, as I started thumbing through the book, it was as if I put different goggles on. Mm-hmm. And I started thumbing through it. These also, people will say, it's not what you do, but how you do it. It's not what you say, but how you say it. So although I thought there was certainly value in those stories, there was a lot of entertainment factor, the way I had told the stories were reflective of the kind of guy I was at that time. And as I'm flipping through, I'm looking at it, almost feeling sick to my stomach,
Right.
and thinking, wow, way to go. Way to go, Ace. You got your big chance, an international platform to share your story with a worldwide audience. And this is the crap that you want to share?
Right.
Really? And it's like the lights came on, and I just threw the book down on the table. And I think I mentioned the last time that I was on your show, it was as if at that moment I could see Jesus sitting across my kitchen table, going, those arms open, that ready for that embrace.
Yeah.
And it was ready to do it my way.
Right.
Ready to try it my way. Because we've been doing it your way for 40 years now. How's that working for you?
Well, and the interesting part of that, I've had other guests on the show that have talked about that moment a little bit too, and I want you to expound maybe a little bit on how that felt, because so many people feel like it's this judgment type deal from Christ and from our spirit, when more of it's more of this loving, like, come here, it's time to do it my way. It's a loving embrace, not a point your finger. You get where I'm going?
Absolutely. And a lot of that, a lot of people coming into, whether you're just being saved or maybe you're just having a renewal or a transformation or whatever, having the right people in your world is so helpful. And I did not. I was completely consumed by the rock and roll entertainment world. Yet oddly, out of the clear blue, when all of this is going on, dizzying, out of control, and just all this stuff, out of the clear blue, I get a phone call from my cousin, about, 10 years or so younger than me. And I'd known her whole life, but we had never had any real relationship because she was one of those weirdo Christians. She was really weird Christian. She was the one that the other cousins, we would make fun of behind her back at Thanksgiving dinner and so on.
Right.
Because she was such a kooky Jesus freak. And so I'm in my 40s at that time. She's in her 30s. We had probably spoken a handful of times her entire life. And just at that most tumultuous sort of pinnacle, the phone rings. And it's my cousin. Out of the clear blue. I didn't even know she had my phone number. That's weird. And she says, hey, it's Dorothy. How you doing? And I said, not good. I'll be honest, I'm pretty effed up right now. There's a lot going on, and and she's like, I know. How do you mean you know? She said, God spoke to me 3 times and told me to reach out to you. And she said, I told God no the first 2 times. The 3rd time I went, all right, I'll call Cousin Chris. And she was the angel sent to me immediately. And I bring this up because you were talking about feeling of condemnation or guilt or whatnot. And come to find out, she was not a kooky, weirdo Jesus freak. She's this anointed angel sent by God.
Yeah.
Okay?
It's amazing when the goggles are replaced what you see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And through her kindness and compassion and understanding, she sort of, through the phone, just sort of put her arm around me and offered me some comfort. She talked me off the ledge and broke some things down for me about faith and Jesus and what that is and what it isn't. And she got me into the Word and got me into a translation of the Bible that spoke to me. And never at any time in that process was there any guilt or condemnation.
Yeah.
Because the angel, this woman who I believe 1,000% is this angel sent by God, she's representing Jesus. And Jesus is not about condemnation and guilt and a punch in the face. Jesus is about that. I mean, you find a translation of the Bible that speaks to you. You go to the New Testament and you find that red ink and you see example time and time and time again of how Jesus responded with kindness, compassion, love, grace, forgiveness. But those of us who grew up in religion missed that memo.
Well, and there's a certain amount of openness that has to be there, and the religion aspect of it shuts the door so much that, you know, for me personally, a Dorothy type figure is the one that was sent to me as well, because it was this opening saying, this is the true nature of Christ. This is who Christ really is. And it's amazing how he puts those people in our lock and step at those certain moments.
Just at the right time.
Yeah.
Because there was never a darker time in my life than at that moment. And that was the moment the phone rang.
Yeah.
I didn't even know the number. And I usually don't answer my phone if I don't recognize the number. 407 Orlando, man, maybe it's one of my old beer buddies, you know. So I went ahead and took the call. Surprise. But because of her wisdom, her knowledge, her faith, her relationship with Jesus, she was able to pull me off the ledge, but then point me in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely.
And from there, the whole narrative changes. I'm now find myself at that time, you know, I signed a contract with a major contract with a publisher. Mm-hmm. And so, you know,
making you contractually obligated at that point.
I was on the hook.
Right.
Now I've got to go out and promote a book that I didn't even really believe in anymore. You know, so here I am obligated, and I'm out on tour. I did the U.S. book tour, and I'm in L.A. You know, in one day we went from Orlando to Reading, Pennsylvania to Los Angeles. That was just one day of traveling. So it was the real deal book tour, and doing the morning Zoo Crew radio interviews, and that aspect was great. Meeting people, connecting with readers, connecting with rock and roll fans, connecting with Poison fans, but particularly connecting to young people, very young people who could have cared less that I had experiences in the rock and roll world, didn't even know or care who Poison was. They were coming to my events because I was a writer, and because they had a passion for writing and reading and storytelling as well.
So the bookstore hangouts, not the record store hangouts, but the bookstore hangouts. Yeah.
So it was a wonderful experience doing that book tour that would have been better had I had a different product to be promoting, you know. So here I am, signing copies of A Shot of Poison, the original version, with all this stuff in it and F-bombs and all that. And I'm signing these books to 12-year-old kids in my meet and greet line, and I'm signing their books. Stay in school, study hard, get good grades, make smart choices. Your friend summer. Chris, yeah, you know. So it was just it was interesting. And then I had partnered with my publisher, and between the two of us, we powered through, and we worked the original edition of that book hard for about a year, you know, and I did everything that I needed to do, and then immediately started moving forward with pursuing endeavors that I thought were more valuable, that were personally more meaningful.
And so you have what, like 2 or 3 other books in between these two?
Yeah, I immediately plugged, very long stories. I'll try to give you the greatest hits. Immediately plugged in with the right church. That immediately led me to opportunities to serve. So here I am, this guy who very recently had been out on the tour bus scoring groupies and drugs and Starbucks orders for rock stars. Fast forward just a year or two later, and I'm serving at church. I'm on my hands and knees with a toothbrush scrubbing poop off bathroom floors of the kids' nursery at church, and vacuuming floors and taking out trash, and being honored
in the process
to do so. Honored to be a servant, to not only serve the church and the people in the church, but to also honored to serve and honor God. You know, so that was a really telling point of transformation in my story. So I'm in church and I'm getting the opportunities to serve, humbling.
Well, and I think your passport story is one of the best ones.
And that is the clincher, the apex to this. Because while all that's going on, I also got opportunities to be involved in youth ministry and to mentor young people and really be involved. And that was so fulfilling, so rewarding to be able to sow value into the lives of young people. And everything that I experienced from my experiences in the music world, oddly, I was able to apply to different aspects of my youth ministry, things that were going on at the time. Then it got really weird, and I was given an opportunity to go on my first missionary trip. And a lot of people, it's almost sort of become a joke, you know, a lot of people, when they have their come to Jesus experience, they'll say, you know, give me anything, God, I'll do anything for you, Jesus. Give me that opportunity. Just please don't send me to the jungles. Please don't make me have to be a missionary. Right. Don't make me leave my comfort zone and so on. And but that wasn't me. I didn't give up. I was full on. I'm like, Jesus, bring it on.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to offer me, I'm ready to accept that challenge. So while all these other scrubbing toilets and serving youth ministry and plugging into church and life groups and so, then I find myself in Bible college. Not only at 48, not only did I go back to college, well, yeah, I guess back to college. I went to college for about 2 weeks when I was 19, and they kicked me out after a week. So at 48, not only did I go back to college, I went to Bible college. And I've got a degree on my wall now that says I'm kind of smart when it comes to knowing the Word of God, which is crazy if you know my backstory. So all of that's going on, and then it really gets weird because I got that opportunity to go on my first missionary trip. Mm-hmm. And the craziest thing about that was international missionary work. When I first started working for Poison, when I did my first Poison tour in 2006, I had to acquire a passport because they were going to be traveling around the world. So I had to be available.
Yeah, had to be legit.
I had to be able to travel legally around around the world. And, you know, I went through those experiences with that band. And then when that season was over and I was pursuing faith, pursuing Jesus, and the missionary opportunities came up, that passport that I had gotten years ago to do stupid stuff, I actually wound up using to go on missionary trips, to bring food, medicine, clothing, the gospel, the message of Jesus Christ. I got to bring all of that to hurt, broken, disenfranchised people in the jungles of the third world.
Yeah.
Which is really cool to see. That's one of those weird Jesus things to see.
Well, it's a setup in many ways.
It's a setup.
And if you're, for anyone that's not walking in the faith, that is currently maybe walking in through something that they, don't quite understand or feel like it's darkness or this or that or whatever, there's a way out of all of it. And whatever you're doing at that moment in time is going to relate, because it's a narrative. Your life is a narrative, and puzzle pieces start going together in certain areas. And there's so many pieces that you're like, that puzzle piece, I don't understand what that one was. And then 3-4 years, months, weeks, days, you figure out this light bulb goes on, and it's like,
did not see that coming.
Holy mackerel. Yeah. So one of the things that was really awesome to me about the Flesh and Blood album, I remember, of course, fresh off the coattails of Open Up and Say Ah, basically. Mm-hmm. And by that point, I was captivated by this band. And I remember the album had not come out yet, but the local radio station on a Saturday night was going to play the entire record.
Where were you at that time?
I was in Louisville, Kentucky.
All right.
And so,
is it Louisville or Louisville? How do you really say that?
Depending on what part of town and whether or not you want to get beat up, you can say whatever you want. But most people say Louisville. Louisville. Okay. There you go. I've heard Louisville. I've heard Louisville. Yeah. I've heard but depending on where you're at, you get different reactions. So, at that point in time, what we got? We got a cassette deck. So I remember taping that entire album off the radio and having the album, before it came out, basically at that point. And man, hard hitting. I think Unskinny Bop may have even been a video at that point, but it was the flip side, Something to Believe In, that was like, what is this? And I can't even remember if that was their second or third single off that album.
The formula in that day for the arena rock bands was to hit hard with a new album, hit hard with the first video single, a big arena anthem. Second is the power ballad. And then the third one was the deal closer with...
Which they had like 5 or 6 off of that one.
Or more. It would just... The Flesh and Blood record had legs for... a year.
Even into the Nirvana phase and stuff. It was still surviving a certain number of that. But it's that song in particular that it wasn't just a Poison song at that point. It wasn't, when we talked about substance on this record, it was, what are they talking about? Why is Brett shivering in the code in the video? Mm-hmm. What is going on through the mind? And a good portion of the narrative I got completely understood, but the one thing, even as a teenager, that kind of bothered me or baffled me a little bit is when you see the homeless dude under the Jesus Saves sign, and in the narrative, it's almost as if it's God's fault that dude is sitting there like that. And it's like, wait a minute. It's not God's responsibility to take care of that Jesus Saves sign. It's not his responsibility to carry out his work. It's our responsibility, and we lacked somewhere in there. Humanity has dropped the ball, not God.
Well, there was a lot to unpack with that song. Sure. It's just a beautiful, well-written song.
Definitely.
But it was not talk dirty to me. It was a very thoughtful, thought-provoking lyric. And I think from verse to verse, they've always shared writing credit, all the 4 Poison members. So you don't know for sure who's writing what. I could wager a bet on that one. Mm-hmm. But with Brett being the front man, we'll go with that being his his words. He's the storyteller here, and
which part of the song is his personal narrative with his best friend.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely, and he was a member of the Poison crew, who had just recently passed away. Tragic, but very real. It was authentic. Everything all the components of Brett's message, his story in that song, it's all genuine. It resonates true. It was authentic. It was sort of a everyman perspectives, because we've all had questions and we've all been searching. Even a young person who finds their salvation through Jesus at some point got there because they were seeking something to believe in.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful message and a beautiful song, and each verse is a different little mini movie, and you see that in the video. And there are some very very noticeable. It really gets your attention with the narrative, with
Swaggart.
yeah, exactly. You see that imagery going on, and that was certainly valid at that time. You had all the TV preachers.
I think Ozzy was even doing Miracle Man and a few other,
the TV preachers are being seen on TV at that time, getting almost as much screen time for being dragged out of hotel rooms with prostitutes and teenage boys than doing what they should have been doing. But at any rate, through that song, a lot of valid points are made. There's some questions presented, and I like I said, I think it's very relevant and very genuine, and speaks to where we've all been and where a lot of us are right now. And you see where even golden god rock stars, the very people that their audience is worshiping, even these golden gods have questions.
Yeah.
That's what I really liked about the song, was the band's willingness to be transparent. And
It was almost like as if, don't look to me, find it for yourself, because I don't necessarily
find
have
it for yourself, and we don't know exactly.
Right.
And that's what I thought was really cool about it, was its honesty, its transparency, and by virtue of that, the song is as relevant today as it was 30 years ago.
Well, it's like you said, it's a segmented narrative that plays out in the song, and each time it's like, I've just witnessed this, now give me something to believe in.
Sure.
I just witnessed this, now give me something to believe in. And, I think a good portion of our discussion falls with those goggles we're talking about. There is something to believe in each one of those narratives.
Sure.
Where are you looking and how are you looking into those stories?
Sure. And I think it is often easier than we might think. In America, we are so blessed, and we have all of our gadgets, and we're just so smart that you got to prove it to me. But you prove it to me first, and then I'll believe it, because I'm very intellectual and just so smart. I go out in the mission fields in Nicaragua. Those folks have nothing. I mean, they've got less than nothing. The mud shacks, dirt floors, not even windows, holes in the walls. I would go in and visit people in their homes, and pigs and goats would be coming into their homes through holes in the walls. Yet, they have found something to believe in, almost to the man. Everybody I've met, they know who Jesus is. You drop the Jesus card out in the jungle in Nicaragua, and that means something. And even for those who have not had their salvation moment, for instance, Nicaragua, when they receive the message, they're very open to receiving it. And once they hear the word, they realize that it is a lot easier than some make it out to. And when they find it, they know that they have finally found something to believe in. And it's just that simple. So I think that a lot of times, the points that Brett brings out in that song, people still struggle with because it's made more difficult than it needs to be. And I think just by virtue of getting into the Word, finding that red ink, and seeking Jesus, when you read his words and how he conducted himself, his character, the true character of Christ, it's a pretty easy sell. Now, some people still would say, "Oh, well, still sounds like a lot of hocus pocus to me. Prove it to me first." Well, if you gotta prove it, then there's really no value in your faith.
Right.
If you're in a romantic relationship, I know there's 52 genders now, so let's just say that, since it's you and I sitting here, let's say you come home late from work and your wife is there and she says, "You're an hour late. Where were you?" You say, "I had to work late." She goes, "Oh, wow, okay. Well, come on in. Your dinner's on the table. I love you," whatever. Well, that speaks to relationship. That speaks to faith. She knows she can believe in you. You don't have to prove anything to her.
Right.
Through that relationship, through her stepping out,
Trust.
and developing that relationship through knowing your true character, you don't have to prove anything. You just say, "I had to work late," and she knows that that's the truth. She has found something to believe in terms of a husband based on that relationship. Now, conversely, if you're in that same scenario and you come home and your wife says, "You're an hour late. Where have you been?" And you say, "Well, I had to work late." She goes, "All right, hold on a second. Are you sure you worked late?" "Well, yeah, I worked until 6, and then I stopped off at the 7-Eleven, and I got a couple of scratch-off tickets, and I got this gallon of milk," or whatever. And she's like, "Nah. Well, I even saw Joe at the intersection on the way home. He saw..." She goes, "Well, let me verify this." And then she calls your boss. "Was Todd really at work till 6 o'clock? Okay, the boss checks out. "I'm going to call the convenience store." "Okay, yeah, you really were there." "I'm going to call your buddy. Did you really see Todd at the intersection?" "Okay, your story checks out. I believe you." There's no value in that relationship because everything is having to be proved. My point to that rabbit trail is that so many of us are still looking for something to believe in, but we're so intellectual, we're waiting for something to be proven to us that might not ever be proven until it's too late.
Right.
And maybe just by stepping out, getting into that word, getting into that red ink, pursuing that relationship with Jesus, we find out that it is a lot simpler. That's something that we can believe in is a lot easier to grasp, and it's right in front of our faces the whole time. What the Vietnam vet in the video is going through, and the heartbreak of the broken neon sign that used to say Jesus saves, all of that darkness can be transformed into light once we get a hold of this. Mm-hmm. And it's easier to find. What we all need to believe in is right there.
Well, and you know, one of the things that I think is pretty interesting is everybody's continually looking for evidence of Christ in this manner, that manner, archaeologically, anthropology, this and this and this. I see Christ right here in the transformation of who you once were versus who you are today.
The passport story alone, yes, you know, is pretty crazy. Now, if that doesn't speak to you, if that doesn't if that sounds like hocus pocus, okay.
Yeah.
We have free will. I get that. And your search continues. Mm-hmm. And I wish you the best outcome. I just went through a lot of stupid stuff on my journey to get here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, sometimes I wish I could have got here earlier. Sure. If I had just opened my eyes and found that, you know, earlier in the story. But
I keep coming back to, in my mind anyway, John 3:16 through 18, and probably with more emphasis on 18, especially with your story, you know, with family members, with and we need to go to it so we can look here. But I keep coming back to that narrative because so many focus on John 3:16.
Sure. And why not?
Well,
that's a good one. But there's
so much more.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And, you know, especially when you add 17 in there, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And then one step further in 18, whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already because they have not believed. You know what? You've got New Living Translation, don't you?
Yes, I do.
So let's go with you, because this is NIV, and I bet you New Living sounds even better. So let's start from the beginning on that.
Okay, so if we want to start at John 3:16, we all know this one. It's they even have this at football games in the end zone and so on. And it is in red ink, which means these are words coming from Jesus. For God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. That's the one everybody knows.
Yep.
Even the guy under the broken old neon sign that used to read Jesus Saves, even he knows that one. Okay? But then it goes on. Jesus continues in John 3:17. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. Verse 18, there is no judgment against anyone who believes in him, but anyone who does not believe in him has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son. Now, if you don't buy it, if it's hocus pocus, all right, God bless you, and we'll go have coffee sometime. But if you do believe it, if you are open to that, then chances are you have found something to believe in right in those three verses.
Well, and this goes a little bit further just for sake of a little more summarization and clarification. Like you were saying, goes right into it. To believe is more than intellectual agreement that Jesus is God. It means to put our trust and confidence in him that he alone can save us.
What have we been saying? Doggone it. We are so smart, dude.
You know, I think that's the real message and point to take away from all this is there is something to believe in.
Sure.
And you have to come to that conclusion. You have to come to that, you know, I can tell you all day long. Chris can tell you all day long. The pastor in the pulpit can tell you all day long. the Satanist in his cult can tell you what he thinks all day long.
Sure.
You have to come to the narrative on your own, and you have to take that step out and decide, this is the walk that I want to pursue. And be ready. Be ready when you do that, because things are going to start coming at you that you're not prepared for.
Things are going to start coming at you, and I can attest
Amen.
to that.
And you know, what's interesting to me is, you know, I've followed Poison for years, and you know, I took a little bit of a backslide when it came to music and just wasn't paying as much attention during kids and everything else, like we've talked about in this whole narrative. But I come back to starting this ministry, starting to look into the Alice Cooper side of things and all this other stuff, and start reading about these rock stars that have sort of had a little bit of enlightenment going on in their life. And CC DeVille comes up in YouTube, and you and I have talked a little bit off air about some of these video sessions and interviews that he's done. And it's as if he's hit that moment, but needs the roots to go with it.
Well, you know, we see that a lot in...
Well, you mentioned to that as well, when you were going through a certain amount of that, not having the right atmosphere and people around
not
you.
having the right people around you.
Makes a difference.
We see numerous times, particularly in recent years, these huge, renowned rock stars having their transformation.
Yeah.
Brian Welch from Korn. Now, what you just said about, we've been talking about needing to be surrounded by the right people. When he was in one of the heaviest bands ever, and with being the guitarist in Korn, and when he had his come to Jesus experience, he actually had to get out of that band and surround himself in the right setting with the right people. He had to be in the right environment.
And if I'm not mistaken, he was not sober at that point either, and needed that to happen as well.
Lots of things needed to play out. So once,
not that that's got to be an element. I don't mean to you know, go that route.
But he was not necessarily standing on solid ground.
Right.
So he needed to get a solid footing, and then once that came to pass, he rejoined Korn. You know, Alice Cooper has come out in recent years as a strong believer in Jesus. And recently, the two of you guys have become friends. Sure. Another example, it's what we call iron sharpening iron.
It's the only explanation for so many things, you know.
So, also in recent years, CC DeVille has come out more and revealed more of his heart and revealed more of his faith perspectives, which is just fantastic because of all the time that I had spent with Poison. What was particularly meaningful to me was the time that I got to spend with CC. Now, being Bobby's guy, I was pretty much focused, dedicated to Bob almost 24/7. But there were...
But was there a difference, like a professional versus a personal? Like, so you could take some of that professional time down and personally get to know CC as well, or not?
No,
a whole
there was
lot of
no
that?
personal time, really. But just through the experience, situations arose where I was able to spend bits of time with CC, and just, you know, he struggled with some things. Sometimes it was not pleasant to be around CC.
Sure.
But even though I hadn't had my transformation yet either, just as a kid raised in religion, I knew that really didn't speak to his true character.
Yeah.
I knew that there was a different guy in there.
Well, the battle's real. I mean, we're still fighting flesh, whether we're
Sure.
of the spirit or not. They're, you know, and didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries.
Yeah.
Then, you know, a couple of years later, this video series came out, little testimonial video series of CC, where he is able to very openly reveal those perspectives and reveal his character and reveal his heart. What you see in those videos, that's the aspect of CC that I really loved and why I wanted to be around him and why I enjoyed being around him so much. Was not the boisterous, crazy stage persona, but that really kind, sensitive, thoughtful, heartfelt version that you see in those videos. So to see him speaking of his faith in recent years does not surprise me in the least bit. I just wish that we had both been at that place when I was out working with the band, because, like I said, the biblical reference, iron sharpening iron, instead of those experiences being difficult for each of us, had we both arrived at the same faith place at the same time, iron could have sharpened iron, and those experiences could have been so much bigger and better for both of us.
Right.
Now, you never say never, as I have learned. But it's a safe bet. You could maybe not put the whole. Yeah, you probably could bet the whole farm. I would never
Only
be
one chicken out, right?
Hang on to one chicken. The reality of me ever being involved with poison on any professional level is not likely to ever happen.
Right.
But in a hypothetical scenario, to be involved with them as a faith advisor, I don't know if the other three guys, where they're at, if they're ready for anything like that right now, but clearly CC is. And I know how that world is, and I know there would be tremendous value for him to have a guy that he's had some history and relationship with, who he can be with constantly in a touring situation, who is only going to encourage him and inspire him from a biblical perspective. That would be the only, I think, from Poison's perspective, there's no scenario in which I ever come any, closer than 100 yards of them. But personally, I'm pretty much on board with that thought. But if there ever was a scenario in which that could work from my perspective, would be as a faith guy. I'm not there to get anybody's groupies after the show. I'm not there to get anybody's drugs, nobody's Starbucks, and no, I'm not even going to carry your suitcase. But if you need a buddy who's going to be with you in the trenches, it's going to get you through and offer encouragement, where you can dive in every night after the show and get into some.
So what you're saying is, when the
Bible
lights
study.
goes down and it's dark, you'll give them a flashlight.
Yeah, sure. I could be that guy. Like I said, the chances of that are about as great as Dallas going to the Super Bowl this year.
Well,
But,
I tell you what, the chance of us ever meeting, the chance of talking to Alice Cooper, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But and he will navigate that if it needs to be navigated.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't go out on tour again with anybody.
Right.
It's just not. There's nothing about that is even remotely appealing to me. However, the opportunity to encourage people, inspire people, the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ, that encouraging source, that is very appealing to me. Mm-hmm. And to have that opportunity in any environment. Now, you asked me at the very beginning of our conversation, and we got off the rails quickly, what led me to do the 10th anniversary edition of A Shot of Poison. And can we show them that again? Because there is two different, this is the 10th anniversary edition. If you go on Amazon, you're going to see two different editions. The original version was only in print for about a year.
Okay.
And after that, it's still on Amazon, but those those copies are overpriced used copies that are just being recirculated.
Right.
This is the revised new 10th anniversary edition. And what moved me to pursue that is a couple of things. Just the fact that I thought the story was pretty relevant. The general story was pretty compelling. I just think that the storyteller got in the way of it. And being a different guy, 10 years later, 10 years of writing experiences, 10 years of life experience, a decade's worth of ministry experiences, and just all those things makes me a different person and a better storyteller, I believe. And there's a wonderful new author on the scene who I discovered a year ago. Her name is Anna Marie O'Brien. She wrote this amazing book called Adventures of a Metalhead Librarian.
Oh, I've seen that book.
People who are into rock and roll, 80s rock, the LA scene.
Yeah.
Anna Marie O'Brien's book is just wonderful. And I got a hold of that about a year ago, and I was really inspired by her style. Now, she's not a Christian author. She writes...
You're reading that?
I read a secular book. Oh, my. But I was just inspired by her writing. I thought, man, she's the kind of writer that I want to be. And long story short, shortly after that, through my reviewing her book and so on, we became acquainted, became familiar with each other, and developed a little bit of a friendship. And she had suggested that the first version of A Shot of Poison was just information overload. But that if I shared essentially the same nuggets, but focused more on the story aspect of it. As she goes, tell me a story. Don't just spew bullet points at me. She said, tell me a story.
And you can feel that in there.
So
you can feel that
narrative.
narrative.
So it's not like I had to go back and rewrite history or anything like that. I've gone back to what I thought was a pretty interesting, entertaining story anyway, and just polished it up and focused more on the story aspect. Also, there is an entire brand new closing chapter that clearly wasn't in the first book at all. 10 years is a lot of time. A lot of things have happened, not only for me personally, but things have happened with the band. And people ask me all the time, they go, what happened? What went on behind the scenes when The Shot of Poison came out? What really was... So I can address all of that. And it's a lengthy 25, 30-page bonus chapter at the end of it. It's got some pretty entertaining, fun anecdotes in there. So it looks different from the first one. It reads different from the first one. That's what I told somebody the other day. It's exactly the same as the first edition, but yet it's completely different.
Yep.
So if for somebody who didn't read the first version that came out 10 years ago, the new one is definitely, I think a worthy read. And maybe even for those who took it for a ride around the block the first time, I think with the new version, you might find some fun nuggets in there as well.
Definitely. Well, Chris, I appreciate you being here today. This has been really
I
great.
appreciate you having me on.
I really feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground, and I'm grateful to be here, and I'm a huge fan. I really admire your ministry, and I'm honored to play some small role in that.
It's likewise, brother, and we're in this together,
All right.
and it's all great stuff. But that is the end of this episode. We are out of here. We want to thank Muchler Creative Media for allowing us to be here once again today. And on that note, as you continue to walk and journey your faith, make sure that you continue to love God, love people, and love Pat. You guys take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Song and Verse podcast. Hopefully it was an uplifting, honest, and meaningful experience for you. We do accept donations. If you feel led to give to the Song and Verse Ministries, check out songandverseministries.com/donate for a number of different ways to give back. And also be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. We hope you tune into the next episode of the Song and Verse podcast. Until then, keep searching for the DNA of God's Word found flowing through song.